Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for part 2 of this UNIDIR webinar series on brain-computer interfaces. I think we're ready to start, even as some participants will continue to log in the next couple of minutes. So in today's webinar, we will explore BCI technology in the military context and in safety critical environments, what types of capabilities BCIs provide, but also some key challenges in adopting the technology and promoting its use in operational contexts. As this is a 3-part series, let me briefly provide a bit of background about the series and how it is structured, especially for those of you who are not able to connect for part 1. So with this series, UNIDIR aims to promote a better understanding of the uses and implications of brain-computer interfaces in the context of international security, as well as highlight emerging risks, including for international humanitarian law. Part 1, which took place in March, explored the technology. So what BCIs are and how they are used. BCIs are communication systems that connect the brain to an external device. They can record data from the brain or stimulate the brain or enable control of an external device or a combination of this. As we have seen in the field of medicine, the use of interfaces by patients with neurological disorders has shown the extraordinary potential of the technology. Used in military or in safety critical environments, however, the scope of BCI technology is can be broader and covers a broad array of capabilities, including to enhance cognitive functions, to improve training, human-machine teaming, or enable direct remote control of weapon systems. These developments come with specific risks, however, and also challenges that we will discuss today. In today's webinar, we will take the following approach. The first 2 presentations will cover specific uses of BCI technology. They will focus in close detail on some of the key applications of the technology in military and safety critical contexts. Then, with the third presentation, we will zoom out and try to understand the technology more on the macro level, if you will. So what it means to integrate and adopt the technology in defense settings, as well as we will also focus on broader security and strategic implications. So I'm very pleased now to introduce our speakers, and I will introduce them in the order of their talks. First is Dr. Riccardo Poli, who's professor in the School of Computer Science and Electronic Engineering at the University of Essex and co-director of the Brain-Computer Interfaces and Neural Engineering Lab. Today, he will present on key uses of BCI technology for decision-making and cognitive augmentation, including risks and vulnerabilities. Dr. Frédéric Deshayes is a professor at the Institut Supérieur de l'Aéronautique et de l'Espace at the University of Toulouse. Today, Dr. Deshayes will present on applications and uses of BCIs in specific safety critical environments with examples for uses by aircraft operators, and will also share some key aspects related to human-machine symbiosis. Dr. Margaret Kosal, our third speaker, is an associate professor at the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Institute of Technology, and today in her presentation, she will present on dynamics of technology adoption, cyber risks, and also provide an overview of key geopolitical and strategic aspects related to this technology. Each speaker will have about 10 minutes or so to share their presentation. And at the end, we will have about 20 to 25 minutes to discuss and to dedicate to a Q&A session. But of course, please feel free to share your questions in the question window in the meantime as we progress through the webinar. So with this, I'm just going to hand it over to our first speaker, Dr. Riccardo Poli. And I believe he also has a PowerPoint presentation to share with us.
Okay. This is the lab that I co-direct, and I'm sorry for the noise, but unfortunately, there are cleaning people that wanted to come in my office as well, but they're doing the correct. So let's start with human cognitive enhancement. So, which many of the techniques I'll explain today are actually achieving either at the level of an individual or at the level of a group. Cognitive enhancement are techniques that improve cognition, and cognition is any essential process to which we get to know things. It could be, so there is a list of items here, and one of those is decision making. which is perhaps one of the topics I'll focus more. I just wanted to get not just applications from my own lab, but also earlier work. So this is the DARPA NIA project that had the desire to improve the speed of sifting through aerial pictures or satellite pictures. And the process is shown here. Someone is through the use of a BCI. So you can see that the BCI is applied to this person, recording electrical signals in an invasive manner. And the person is obviously looking at very high resolution picture that would be really hard to scan and identify elements, but it's also time consuming. So that picture is split into smaller pictures and they're sequenced. So they're shown at very, very high speed to this person. And somehow, through the recording of the brain signals, we can differentiate between the targets, like the line in red and then or the other way around, and the non-targets. So the targets is this is a scalp map of that distribution of voltages. It's just one channel of that map. And the notion is that leads to an automatic detection, because when a person sees a picture of interest, even without being conscious about that, there would be a response from the brain, and that allows the system to detect pictures that are of interest that can then be further analyzed. So, we were interested in that kind of activity, and we wanted to try it ourselves, but we used a different approach in our lab, which was to sort of exploit the power of groups, especially in sensing or decision-making or other activities. Groups tend to produce better performance, more sensitivity to the environment, etc. And so we performed the same kind of task, but with airplane detection on city on a city sky. You can see this is the slowest speed that we use. This is only about 6 frames per second. I don't know if you can see them, but these things can be done up to 15 or even 20, like in the DARPA project. They use up to 20 frames per second. So if you look at these pictures, you should be able to see about 10 airplanes, and probably you can only see a fraction because it's so difficult. But the brain does detect unconsciously those elements, and it can respond to them. Now, so in those tasks, there is no time for people to actually press the mouse button or a key press, because the pictures are moving so quickly, they'll disappear rapidly before that press has been completed. So then you have to rewind, etc., etc. So we considered the idea, but there are many other tasks where you do have time to think about the situation, but maybe the situation is too complex, or you have too little time to actually view the situation. And in that case is where a different type of approach works quite well, which is that you gather information from the participant themselves, but you're also monitoring their brain activity with the brain-computer interface. And then in our particular approach, this was a real big transition. Instead of estimating the decision that the participant wants to do, as we've seen in the previous 2 projects, we estimated the confidence, the objective probability of that decision being correct. And by using that as a weight, we were able to do much better, in fact, in a variety of tasks. And last week, Katerina Sunel from this same lab here showed an outpost experiment. I just want to show you a slightly different task, which is a corridor exploration. And there are very quickly characters appearing, and it's very, very dark. It's night, and people need to decide whether they were, friends or foes, whether they were wearing a helmet or not. This is also very difficult, but if you're doing it with groups, and if you're recording the confidence of people, and you use it to further disambiguate their suggestions, then you get a much improved result. And we've applied that on a variety of other domains, including auditory military communication and all sorts of other things. And the key thing that it seems that it is applicable to essentially any situation like the ones depicted here, where there is a lot of information to be processed and one brain on their own can hardly take it all in. There is high pressure, not enough time, etc. So these are all cases where this research is used. And indeed, it's been funded by the UK Ministry of Defence and also some projects by the Department of Defence for over 10 years now. So obviously, all brain-computer interfaces these days rely on machine learning. And so that's a form of AI. And a human with a BCI is already sort of a mix between a human and machine. So you can think of it as a cyborg in some way. And a group of humans, obviously, with BCIs are a cyber groups in some sense. But the key thing is not this, the nomenclature here, but the fact that this is not the only way of integrating AIs with humans. We've, in fact, found that it is possible to use AIs as team members in decision-making tasks. And last week, so that creates an even more powerful mix where the humans probably using their own BCIs, personalized BCIs, and they're put in groups with AIs that are able to do the same task, essentially. And last week, Katerina showed this slide that shows how this integration between AIs and humans with the BCIs is performed, but I'm not going to discuss this, it's beyond the point. But the key thing that we've learned by exploring the architecture for 5 years in the US-UK project has been that in order for the groups to work well, there needs to be mutual trust. But humans, they're not very happy to trust the machines unless they are humanized, essentially. So, which is kind of unusual. So basically, the machines need to be able to express their confidence, and that is part of the deal. If you don't have machines that can express confidence, you can't apply our method. But in addition to that, machines are typically optimized for accuracy. And a very accurate machine, it may be very different in terms of behaviors from what a good human operator is. So, we need to tune the AIs towards that. So maybe reducing a little bit their performance, but making them more similar to the humans. And also we found that we need to give them certain learning capabilities and other properties like slowing them down, strangely. So with that, we have been able to obtain human groups for even more difficult tasks like sequential resource allocation, which is common in all military situations, and like handling a crisis with limited resources, for instance. So, just quickly, and I wanted to sort of talk about the risks and benefits. I've been asked to think about those and now and in the future. And personally, I've now thought for almost an hour about this equation, and I've written it for you for the first time. And I don't know, it's probably very wrong. But the thing is, I see that you need to look at, have a census for the risks or vulnerabilities, if you want to call them that way, and a census for the benefits. And really, it is very simple. If you have that census and you can estimate the probability of the benefits and their associated value, if they manifest themselves, and the probability of the risks and their associated damage, if they, then you have a metric to evaluate how beneficial a particular technology or application of technology is. Obviously, over time, you learn more about your census can grow. And you might discover that certain things that you consider could be a risk, actually they are not, because they can be overcome by the technology or something. But that basically, I expect this balance to be a function of time that will change as we learn more about the technology, and it'll be more precise estimates. And it's very difficult to estimate the probability of certain events. But you still, if you want to have a sort of talk about risk and benefit in a scientific manner, I think you need to have this. I'll be very brief and conclude very quickly. So just to say that in relation to this, the systems I'm describing, where you have decision makers distributed over a geography, and that not every decision maker is necessary to actually make the decisions, and they can be done without others, without everybody. So that is a more robust system in relation to attacks, but also it's a system that allows you to detect potential enemies inside your ranks, because if someone deviates consistently from the decisions of the group, or expresses a confidence that is in disagreement with most confidence, then you know that either that person is tired, or that AI needs to be retrained, or that there is an enemy in your ranks. I would like to conclude with this over fours, I think. So these are additional risks, which are related, the first two, over-promising. This is related to the fact that if you're promising certain benefits and you assume they'll have great value, then you're overinflating this balance. And I think we must be careful never to overstate the benefits of the technologies we're proposing. But similarly, over-fearing it, which means you emphasize these risks, you make a very long list of risks, but never ever, in fact, as far as I know, people focus on what's the probability of that risk. They more focus on the damage. And then over suspicion, obviously, if you're working in systems where humans and AIs are mixed, people tend to be suspicious, but also with technology, people tend to be over-reliant, like your mobile phone. Once you trust the technology, you tend to be over-reliant, and instead you need to be vigilant, because even the machine learning algorithms can eventually misclassify if the input data are different from the data used in training. And that's all I have for you. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. Actually, I have some questions, but I'll leave it for the Q&A for later. I'll just hand it over now to Fred to share his PowerPoint, and then we'll discuss more at the very end. So Fred, if you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you, Irina, for the invitation. And I would like to discuss with you guys the challenges of the implementation of such neurotechnology, in the real world. And the question is, why do we need neurotechnology for, Ricardo already did a nice demonstration about the potential application for for the military domain, but as long as flight safety is concerned. And in order to illustrate this, I would like to start with a video. There's an alarm that has been yelling for the last 2 minutes. We have two pilots, the backseat one. It announced that they are not paying attention to the landing gear warning. The alarm is modulated, but they missed the alarm. So you might say, okay, these are not professional pilots. The design of the alarm is not, far from being perfect. But recently, there's been a dramatic accident. One passenger died. There have been dozens of alarms telling the pilots to go around, but they missed the alarm. So it will be very interesting to implement passive brain-computer interface in order to monitor, to detect these degraded mental states. So this is the kind of research we are doing in the lab. So we place our participants in some critical scenarios, like there's smoke. We are simulating engine fire. Smoke, the pilot has 10 minutes to land the plane. You see it's super demanding, critical, whatsoever. You see the smoke. And along with the flying task, the pilot is supposed to respond to auditory alarms. So in these experiments, the scenario was so challenging that our pilots miss, even expert pilots, they miss 60% of auditory alarms. So the idea of our research is to implement this kind of passive BCI technology. So what do we need? We need pilots in the cockpit. We need monitoring technology like electroencephalography. We need to process the signal. In our case, we were able to discriminate different brain responses, like in red, when pilots were missing the alarm, in blue, when we were paying attention to an alarm, sorry. So we were able to feed a machine learning algorithm. We were able to train AI to identify pilots' brain response to an alarm and absence of brain response to an alarm. And then it paves the way to the implementation of neuroadaptive cockpits that will adapt to the user. Let's say we detected that the pilot will miss the alarm. Maybe we can give more authority to auto flight or change the modality of the alarm. As simple as that. So one thing is, in this experiment, the experiment that's been presented by Professor Poli, we're using this, wet gel electrodes system. It takes like 30-45 minutes to set this technology. You need to have gel, so pilots, they will never ever accept to have gel for everyday life operation. So if you want to push the BCI out of the lab, you need to use this kind of dry EEG system when you don't need gel. And this is what we did. We are operating aircraft in my university, and we did the same experiments. And you see that the pilot is equipped with this dry EEG system. And why do we need to go out of the lab is because we are measuring, keep in mind that we are measuring microvolts. And when we're doing this experiment, usually we use a Faraday cage to shield against electromagnetic contamination. And the cockpit is like full of electromagnetic contamination. So we have to work hard on signal processing. Like you can see here, we are able to clean the signal. The pilot is responding to an alarm. Okay, so this is the real world. I think this is what is interesting here. And you see that this is a very difficult landing. So from the bright side, we were able to replicate the finding in the flight simulator. We were able to implement passive BCI with 80% of accuracy to detect inattentional deafness. And more than that, we were able to predict in advance, like looking at the brain, 3 seconds in advance, whether the pilot will respond to an alarm. So again, it paves the way to adaptive cockpits. On the dark side, this is how dry EEG looks like. So it's all the pilots after 15 minutes, they complain. It's like super painful. So my lab and other labs are working on making more user-friendly electrode. Like we have this solid gel, which are kind of soft silicone based. And that doesn't work, but we had the idea of mixing this dry plus soft gel, and we were able to still to detect inattentional deafness, this phenomenon. But the main issue is the calibration issue, is that keep in mind that we have to train we cannot place an EEG cap and detect this degraded mental state. We need at least like 20 minutes of data, triggering alarms, expecting that the pilot will miss some of this alarm to train the AI, so in order to be able to detect this phenomenon on the fly. So we cannot ask a pilot on the ground to respond to alarms or to miss alarms. Same if you are interested in mental workload. So this is, again, a strong limitation. Another kind of application where we can think of using a BCI is, could we control an airplane or flight deck, operated flight deck, with our mind? So why is that? The thing is, pilots, they're supposed to have, especially military pilots, we expect them to have their hands on the thrust and stick. And because of G forces, they are not able to press button. So they have to learn, it takes a lot of time, to combination of buttons to operate the aircraft. So why not using the brainwave? And so there's this DARPA Brain Initiative project. You probably already met this woman, last week during one of the presentation. She can operate, so she's got some electrode placed invasive electrodes, so she can operate robotic arms. And then she took part in an experiment. She was not only able to control one plane, but 5 airplanes at the same time. So it might surprise you, but this is what you're doing. Like, I have 2 arms, 2 feet, fingers. I can control all these, actuators at the same time. But when it comes to non-invasive technology, like the ones that we are using, or Ricardo Poli was mentioning, is what these guys are doing is amazing, but it's like super slow, not user-friendly at all, you see. Nothing to compare with the invasive technology. So why is that? Because when you use there are different types of paradigm. The first one is mental imagery. So you need to think about your left hand, right hand, left foot, right foot. And then when you think about your left hand, you can maybe turn the plane on the left, on the right, go forward, move backwards. But it takes like 20 to 30 minutes to train yourself to generate this signal so that AI can decode your brain. So it's a tedious calibration. We are facing what we call BCI literacy. Like 20-25% of participants are unable to operate this BCI. It's not intuitive. Like if let's say you want to turn left, like emergency left turn, I'm pretty sure you will not be able to associate this gesture to turn left. You have a limited number of commands, and you can do one thing at the same time. So you cannot operate the car or the plane and talk at the same time, for instance. So there is another paradigm, which called the PLIT 300 speller. So let's say you want to spell the SP letter, then we'll need to flash this colon. So your brain will react to this colon, to this row, this colon, because it contains this letter. But maybe you think about the C or the I, but then they will flash this row, and then they will figure out that you are intent to press this key. So let's take a look at the demonstration. And you see that again is very slow. So the guy is supposed to type, hands-free. We're supposed to type the letter F. Then we need to flash this row and this column to activate the letter F. And you see that it takes like 30 seconds before you can type the letter. So they made progress, but still it's very slow. One thing that works pretty well that we're doing in the lab is this SSVP. So we are flashing or flickering lights. And if you focus your attention on these 12 hertz, so this flickering object, then we measure some 12 hertz on the back of your head. This is the visual cortex. Okay, so if you look at this 11 hertz, your brain will be entrained and resonates. So it works pretty well if you look at this video. By clicking left, over to left, up, go up, get up. Okay, so it works pretty well, but still keep in mind that there's like a 25 minutes calibration. But the thing is, it's not, people are using like LEDs, like very close to the eyes so as to get better signal. So it's not user-friendly. You can trigger epileptic seizure. So what we managed to do in the lab is you can see how many flickers. You see 3 flickers, 1, 2, 3. But we managed to make a 4th transparent flickers that you don't see. But using advanced machine learning algorithm, we're able to detect that you're paying attention to this big transparent flicker. And how do we use that? We use that because our goal is to implement like kind of novel type of BCI that combines reactive and passive aspect of BCI. By reactive, I mean that we can use our brainwave to like interact with the flight deck, to like turn on the lights, activate the auto flight. And we have these flickers that we can place on some specific screen. In the same way, we can measure how much attention you pay to such critical information. Okay, so then we can detect, if you fail to pay attention to visual alarm, for instance. Just to give you an idea, so the pilot is supposed to use this brainwave to set the flaps, and it's hands-free interaction. You can still fly the aircraft, and you see that it turns on and off the lights. We lower the gear just using brainwave.
1000.
Okay. Here is going to activate the auto flight system. So to activate the auto flight system, you're supposed to press this button, but just by kind of thinking of the auto flight system, it will connect without using the hands. Okay. And let's take a look at the passive part of the BCI. So there was like kind of incoming aircraft. And when the aircraft was in the middle, you were supposed to avoid the aircraft. So we can measure how much attention you pay to this radar in a passive way. So if you are in the loop, the system will trigger a green light telling you that you pay attention to the collision. And in case you're going to miss it, this is the case here, you get a range message and the auto flight will take over and will do the maneuver. Okay, so in order to avoid the collision. So just to wrap up, so on the bright side, neurotechnology, it helps us to understand human performance in the wild. can help us to inform the design, like designing new, more catchy alarm for certification. We provide new forms of interactions, and we can optimize human-machine symbiosis. On the dark side, we saw that it's not 100% reliable, so I would never accept to fly in an aircraft operating by brainwave. It could be easily hacked, like we can bypass the brain, or we can use like electromagnetic contamination, noise, and the pilot will not be able to operate these aircraft or our aircraft. We have calibration issues. So one solution is that we are doing this in our lab. Everybody's doing this nowadays. It's about open science, data sharing. When we do our experiments, we have a limited pool of participants, and so it's difficult to train our model. So now every labs over the world are sharing the data. But one drawback is this is what happened with GitHub. So GitHub, all the researchers in the world share their code, and ChatGPT was trained on this code. So my code, ChatGPT is making money because I made some code. And the same issue may happen here because I'm sharing my data, but who is going to own the data at the end? I don't know. Of course, we need to improve the design of electrodes, and there are a lot of ethical issues. I'll be happy to discuss with that, and maybe Maggie will mention that, because we are collecting data from pilots, what's going to happen to this data. So thank you very much for your attention.
Wow. Thank you, Fred. That was absolutely brilliant. It's very interesting, and perhaps you can explain a bit more to our audience at the end, a bit about the speed 300 signal. I think it's very interesting also for image detection, and when we're thinking in terms of military uses, target recognition, perhaps. We can discuss more. I think this is very interesting, how we can bypass in a way the conscious thought process to find objects of interest using BCIs, even when we're not consciously aware that we're looking for them. But with this, let's move to the final presentation. So I'll hand it over to Maggie now for her thoughts and overview on how BCIs may be adopted by various states, what it means for defense establishments to rely on BCIs, and also she will share some thoughts on cyber risks, among others. So I'll hand it over to her. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Joanna. And I do want to say thank you to Unidir for hosting this really fabulous series. I think this is very important work. Really also need to thank my colleagues who went before me for setting this up so perfectly, so I don't need to go through the background of those fantastic examples of cutting edge science that they presented. So I'm coming at this. I am now a card carrying social scientist. My background is as a PhD chemist, and then in between that, I did work starting a sensor company, not BCIs, but other types of sensors. So this is part of a larger body of work looking at emerging technologies and the future of conflict. So in preparation for this talk, I was looking back at some of the early work I did looking at neurotechnology, the cognitive neurosciences, looking back especially to the UK's Royal Society Brainwaves project of 2012 that I was involved in. So there is this fundamental question which was teed up so nicely in many ways. Why do we want to study the cognitive neurosciences, BCIs, from either a security perspective, from an innovation perspective, from a risk analysis perspective? There are all these different pieces. If I would, if you all would indulge me, one of the things that this type of work illustrates so well is depend on the work like my colleagues here at Georgia Tech, as well as colleagues in our briefing, we're describing this the cutting edge, the work that they are doing, pushing back the bounds of knowledge in the science. And so the work that I'm doing is looking to push back the bounds of knowledge and understanding, and more importantly, developing robust analytical and repeatable frameworks for explaining and understanding the geopolitics. And I could speak to each of the areas on the slide. I am not going to, because that would be much too long. What I do want to set up here is talking specifically about some of the recent large-scale efforts. So looking at government-based efforts in not only BCIs, but neurotechnology, cognitive neurosciences. In many ways, the cognitive neurosciences, the brain research, is sort of a way where nanotechnology was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Every nation state has a program. This has become in many ways a marker of prestige. This slide highlights some of the current largest programs. I will expect that we will start to see programs developing in other states. Now, one of the questions that my co-author, Joy Putney, she was a PhD student from quantitative biosciences, and I looked at, was we wanted to, again, try to develop this framework thinking about who will be the first adopter in the context of security implications. So this, first of all, it's important to differentiate adoption very different across different states. It's also very different whether it is something that is civilian versus something that is in the military. And some of this has to do with the types of institutions and the organizations. There are other just aspects of the different ethics of these groups. So in our work, we looked at a number of quantitative, semi-quantitative, and qualitative variables to try to assess who is likely to be the first adopter of BCIs in a security context. And what's kind of fun about this is there already have, of course, been adoptions and commercializations in a civilian context. So sort of to pull this up again most broadly, I've removed the specific nation states identification that we were using from this slide intentionally to try to keep it more broad. But as one is thinking about risks, as one is thinking about how these are likely to be adopted, often one of the first pieces that is looked to is funding. Funding itself is not the best variable. You have to consider it, but there are lots of reasons, and I'm happy to go into that, why funding is not the best variable. So in this case, two different states contrasting, you can look at their major brain projects and their stated goals. One has a stated goal that is focusing on basic clinical neurotech applications, particularly with regard to things like prosthetics for civilian uses. The other one has implicitly stated what it calls a two-winged goal, in which it is looking both for the civilian and the military goal. In terms of thinking about the transition, even if one has absolutely fantastic basic research institutions, has the ability to produce amazing basic research, there's a next step that is critical when we are thinking about security, and that is, can you transition it to technology? And I really appreciated Fred's his pulling back the curtain in some ways to show us some of these challenges as trying to do this transition. And that's really important to understand. I've encounter a fair bit of work that treats basic research as if it is the same thing that is being deployed by the military, and it's not. And that's critically important. You know, when we look at, and everyone loves to talk about DARPA because DARPA does really cool research. You know, DARPA itself does not actually deploy or equip soldiers. That's really important to understand if you want to talk about these implications. So shifting over to some of these more quantitative quantitative variables, one of the most useful predictor is this one of the the sociological norms. And there has been a huge number of studies that we leveraged looking at the indicators within different groups of people to show where you are more likely to adopt versus not. We also identified a novel variable, which is this number of research monkeys. And it sounds somewhat trivial, but if one is going to be developing BCIs, particularly developing it, particularly if you're looking at invasive BCIs, so ones where you are more directly connecting into the brain, research monkeys are critically important. And here we can unpack a number of things, but this is a novel variable for thinking about this. This is from a different publication where we were looking at another way. This was assessing threat, but you can think about this in the context of trying to look across these different types of emerging technologies. And this is one where the middle column is brain-computer interfaces. We've got mechanical, which are like exoskeletons, and then advanced biological chemical agents, looking at different types of adversaries and thinking about what are the capabilities that those states have now. Restrictions is a whole number of things, but the biggest aspect of restrictions has to do with are there aspects of international law? Are there aspects within the laws of armed conflict, humanitarian law, that somehow address these? And you can see by the difference in colors that there's a great deal of difference, and particularly if we'll look at that sort of brain-computer interfaces, it says, you know, 1 over restrictions, it's low, it's green. What that means is there are very few restrictions within international law. On the other hand, if you look at advanced biochem weapons, that's red because we have quite robust treaties, particularly in the Chemical Weapons Convention. So we go through and we try to do these assessments. So this is a color chart. Behind this is a whole lot more of data and analysis to get to these. Again, it's a mix of quantitative and qualitative variables. So I wanted to very briefly address this issue of cyber. You know, so as we look at BCIs with cybersecurity risks, this is a great example of where we got this entangled technologies, and these are converging sciences. For the applications that are being both seriously and sometimes more in the context of science fiction that one can encounter out there, they're all intrinsically linked to cyber. You might say this is a very personal manifestation of the Internet of Things, where the thing is now your brain that is on the internet. This has in many ways more significant implications for security, and in particular more significant and different implications than we're thinking about cybersecurity with things when we're thinking about it within the brain-computer interface. And so there are, you can look at it as passive, reactive, or adversarial cyber intrusions, cyber elements. Of the most concern is where there might be some sort of hijacking or remote control attempted of the individual. And one can look at scenarios in which this might then create a situation where there's coercion. Are you going to inadvertently cause someone to do something that they would otherwise not do, including something that might be against the laws of armed conflict or a violation of the laws of armed conflict. Might this be used to track people? I mean, that's a very simple one that we've already seen with, like the personal devices you wear on your wrist for counting the numbers of steps, or if you're more if you're more outgoing than I for counting and tracking where you run. So this is going to be even the next level. And because the individuals who at least initially are likely to be using this are going to be some of the highest level individuals, they become more higher value targets. Also need to think about impersonation. Are you sending incorrect information, impersonating a commander to troops deployed? So there are a whole number of different potential scenarios. Privacy, of course, is a question. And one of the pieces that, in thinking about this intersection with cybersecurity and BCIs, there's this concept from cybersecurity, the threat surface areas. So you have to look at the network, the hardware, the software, and then also you've got to add to that thinking about the person as part of this threat surface area in a way that it previously has not been considered. So with that, I will conclude, and I look forward to the questions from the audience and any other questions out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think we have about 15 minutes max for questions. I have a few questions that I can start off with, and then we have one here in the Q&A window as well that we will address. So I think my first question is to Ricardo concerning you mentioned in your presentation this link between trust and confidence. So there is a certain level of confidence of the BCI that is needed for the human user to have trust in the technology. But when you establish that link, so for a user to reliably sort of reliably rely on a BCI, what does confidence mean? So what is the threshold for confidence, and how does that vary over time? Because I'm guessing we're not talking about 100% sort of reliability, but how does that evolve essentially over time, and how do you measure that connection between trust and confidence?
Yeah, so I'm sorry I didn't explain very accurately, but so basically the confidence that the BCI estimates is the confidence of the humans. And it's entirely trained based on the human errors during the calibration phase. So it's an objective measure of performance for as long as the humans are not, changing their ability to perform the task. Then that will work. And it's much better than the humans' confidence, which we do use and we test, because it's unaffected by overconfidence or underconfidence. So it's calibrated, that confidence. So where we have instead DIs as team members, then in order for us to aggregate decisions based on confidence, we need DIs themselves to also have a notion of confidence. And there are multiple ways of obtaining that, and that's not it's not difficult. But what is more difficult is for the humans and the eyes to play ball, in that the humans will normally detect whether the other entity that is, or the other entities that are making decisions with them are humans or AIs, and if the AIs are unmodified. Okay, so what that means is that they can they can do arms races basically. So it's normal in a team of when you form a team, you may have a forming, a storming, a conforming, and then the performing phase. In other words, performance tends to go down and then it recovers over time. It appears that with the AIs, if people become suspicious of them, the arm race will continue. However, we found that if you humanize the AIs, if you make them more similar to in terms of behavior and learning performance, etc., to the humans, then the humans think, okay, this, I don't know whether the other thing is an AI or not, but it seems to be doing more or less the same kind of things that I'm doing. And then at that point, the team produces better results than this individual alone. And in fact, if you think about this, if I give you a human and one AI, you have a team at the cost, and so you get the performance of the team with the wisdom of crowds and all the rest at no added cost, because it's computing time. It's the humans that cost money. The computing time is nothing. So it's a form of human augmentation just by teaming up with an AI. I hope that it's clear enough.
Yes, it's very clear. I was just wondering that if there are not intrinsic risks in a way in humanizing the AI sort of from on the other end, so that it can create a false sense of equivalency, between an AI teammate and a human teammate, which comes with its own risk. But I'll leave that for another conversation, because we need to focus more, to stay focused on BCIs for today. But no, thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. Fred, I actually have a question for you, because you already covered this in your presentation. The many challenges that come with usability. So you looked at, for example, using dry versus gel-based fitted caps, and you looked at some of these usability issues, and there's already sizable literature in BCIs that looks at how their usability and redundancy risk. For example, you need new equipment, you need additional sort of enabling systems to help a BCI system work. But what is, from your experience, what does this mean for usability overall? So do we need each time to have new safety protocols, new sort of processes of testing each BCI equipment each time? What does it really mean for usability in the real world?
Oh, I'm not sure I'll be able to address your question, because it's still a research question, and we, as mentioned, we're very far from pushing this BCIs technology out of the lab. So I think we need to to go for standardization, I guess, in terms of algorithm, in terms of sensors, but I'm not sure we're already ready for this. We're still working in the lab, trying to find what is the best technology. As you say, we can combine different sensors like EEG, FNIRS, eye tracking, behavioral measures to improve the reliability of this technology. And I see there's a nice question from Issa Toussar in the chat. She's commenting about time variance cycle neurophysiological fluctuation. Yeah, it's also related, because I'm Fred, but maybe in 10 minutes, I won't be the same Fred from a neurophysiological point of view. So it's still a challenge to see what are the invariants, what characterizes me as Fred or you as Iona. So yeah, it's a long way before we can push the BCI out of the lab.
Can I contribute a little on this? Yeah. So we've put to the test a variety of things to see to what degree we can push the AI out of the lab. For instance, we did some decision-making tasks with the people sitting, and the same decision tasks with the same people walking on a treadmill.
Yeah.
And strangely, it turned out that actually the people on the treadmill, they performed better. Or the same. We were expecting the noise caused by the movement, etc., but actually, in effect, people in the more naturalistic situation, they found they were more engaged, more interested. They were doing something else that was helping with their mind-wandering behavior, etc. And also, we've tried to see whether the BCI trained on a certain group of people, Frederick was talking about transfer learning kind of thing. So, can you train on a certain number of people and test on a different number of people and different people? And that kind of works, but of course with reduced performance. We've even tried training with these confidence estimators on people who did a different experiments, a variety of different experiments, and then tested on a new group that did a different experiment, different situation. And that also worked. But of course, again, reduced performance. So it all depends on what you want to achieve. In fact, we've tested for variations in cap position. So it is obviously preparation, etc. It's limiting how much this can go out of the lab. But if it's a question of value, so if you're making life and life and death decisions, and you need to, well, maybe that 10 minutes preparation is not such a bad thing because you're going to do something really important. And I don't know. So it's all a question of balance.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if I see Fred is unmuted. If you wanted to respond, or just. But no, thank you both, and also thank you for taking one of the questions from the chat. I was going to get to that, and it was a perfect sort of segue to that. So we'll continue with the question for Maggie, and then we have an additional question from the chat. So Maggie, you talked a lot about you provided an overview and a comparative overview of how BCI technology is being funded, and the sort of the kind of infrastructure that is being put in place to develop it around the world. But when we think about governance of this kind of technologies and the sort of restrictions that countries may wish to impose on exporting certain kind of technology or limiting it for national military use, how do you see the space of governance evolving and shaping up in the future, given that the technology will continue obviously to develop for commercial applications, for medical applications? So given that it's intrinsically a dual use kind of technology, how do you see the governance and the limitations in the national security sense taking place or happening at the same time?
So thank you for that question. And I would start by saying that, to truly answer that, you have set up essentially a PhD dissertation, if not multiple ones, because that speaks to the complications of this. And as you noted, these have applications across so many different fields, never mind looking at it from just the dual use perspective. So the first place that I would say we need to start with, you sort of suggested, which is what are the restrictions, particularly domestic restrictions, that relate to medical information and privacy of personal information. And frankly, I think that is likely to be your strongest lever to regulate this, looking to leverage things that exist. Now, as we move from medical applications, clinical applications, to applications that have greater implications geopolitically, then we do need to start thinking about the international community and different players in it. And this becomes much more difficult because, as I noted, there aren't treaties that explicitly talk about BCIs. Now, I want to state very clearly, I am not advocating or suggesting we need a BCI treaty. I do not think that would be helpful. You will see places where people are suggesting things like that, or that they are part of other aspects. First thing is leverage the existing international law. And I say that not only because it is very robust, but actors who want to use some of these emerging technologies, or actors who want to undermine the current international system of laws, treaties, they like having that that messiness, that goopiness out there. So this is the first place, is emphasize that we have a set of robust laws of armed conflict. We have robust humanitarian laws, implementation and enforcement, whether it be at the international level, or what is, the crux often is at the state level becomes more important. And I know that's not a satisfying answer in many ways, but I think it's the answer that is both precise, correct, and true. And that, again, that speaks to the importance of the kind of work that you all are doing, which really says, hey, we need to bridge this scholarly, this academic work, pushing back the bounds of knowledge, whether it's in the neurosciences, electrical engineering, computer science, or it's in political science, with the actual implementation and the actual carrying out of that. Over.
No, thank you. We have 2 more questions. I will try to perhaps give you 30 seconds for an answer, if you can do that, please. So because we're running out of time. So, but of course, this is a very important question on cyber risk. So I think, Maggie, I'll let you answer this, because you also cover cyber risk specifically in your presentation. How do you think, what is the best way to approach cyber risk management in the case of BCI, and it's particularly implantable BCI? So how can we implement the cybersecurity protocols, but also cyber hygiene practices for the use of BCI? So if you have just a few thoughts to share on this in 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, in many ways, the questioner gave some of the answers that I would respond with, is that these often are practices that are at the institution, the group, the individual level. More broadly, this is where I would look at this and say, this is where countermeasures and the development of countermeasures, whether it be to interrupt an attack, or in many ways to detect when an intrusion is happening, become critically important. And often that looks like AI, ML systems that can detect these things much faster and better often than people can. And often countermeasures gets understudied in terms of funding, both development of countermeasures in the experimental lab or in silico, as well as understanding countermeasures and the need for them in the policy realm. Over.
No, thank you so much. I know that perhaps some of you will need to disconnect because we had 1 hour, but I would like to take, if you don't mind, if the panelists don't mind, to just take one last question. Perhaps this is a bit more relevant for Fred, because he looked at the at the use of BCIs for aircraft operators, and perhaps not just for Fred, but I would be especially interested to think how you see this. So, as we are trying to use BCI technology in a way to leverage certain signal from the human brain to detect objects of interest faster, or to just be more responsive. How can we look at this in the broader sort of landscape of improving the autonomous capabilities of aircraft itself? So improving landing, for example, and certain features in the aircraft system, so that it's better performant by itself, rather than, or irrespective of the certain frailties of the human operator or a human pilot at the helm. How do you see this in the
Yeah, I think this Ricardo mentioned this automatic decoding of intention or object recognition. Am I right, Ricardo? With the operator detecting like aircraft or...
Yeah, so there is a lot of... So somehow with the BCI, you can tap in the unconscious brain. And we know that the unconscious brain is really good at doing certain things, like recognizing if someone is honest or not. It recognizes it before you're aware of it. And the same kind of thing can happen when you have rapid presentation of pictures, or pictures that are too complex for you to actually get to the level of consciousness. But you have a gut feeling, and listening to that gut feeling is actually getting information from your brain, useful information from your brain. I don't know if this answers the question, sorry.
Yeah, and I will, yeah, I think I agree, but also with this alarm detection, so with like the brain automatically gets this auditory processing. It's like when you drive your car, you're listening to the radio, and all of a sudden there's an accident, so you shut down the hearing. We demonstrated that, so we could inform the cockpit that the pilot did not pay attention to the alarm to perform an automatic maneuver. So that would make sense, I think. But still, we need to keep the pilots in the loop, because if he or she doesn't understand the behavior of the machine, he or she will try to take over. So observe some participants took part in my experiments after September 11. We wanted to have plane that will never be able to crash on anything. We trained the pilots, and when we started the experiments, so the plane did an automatic avoidance maneuver, and the pilots tried to disconnect everything so as to fly it. So if you don't, so this is about human-machine symbiosis. So we need to get information from the cockpit, but we need to, to have this feedback to the pilots, and also there's like unconscious way to wake up the pilots that we're working on. So
okay, wow, that's very. I'm sure we
need
could
more time. I'm sorry.
Yes, we will need much more time to discuss. There's another question that I'm afraid we will not be able to answer, but I think Maggie already in one of her answers she pointed to a link to her article where perhaps you can find more on this difference between civilian and military dedicated research. But with this, I think I'm afraid we will have to wrap it up for today. So thank you very much to our speakers for their thoughtful and fascinating presentations. Thank you all for your very engaging questions and active participation. Our third and final webinar in this series will take place on the 3rd of May, and we'll discuss legal and ethical questions related to the use of BCIs and in the context of armed conflict and in the military. I hope you're all able to join us then. And thanks again very much for being with us today. Wishing you all a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.